Fortune Cookie Wisdom. Well, that was interesting, said Chloe as she, Chris, and Michael settled into Miss Sunshine and out of the cold.
Interesting. Well, don't gloat just yet. We still haven't caught the killer. So far, we haven't narrowed down just who the killer is. There was no usable DNA at either scene. We have no way of knowing who the third victim will be. We got fuck all.
Chris raised his voice in frustration, looking ahead at the next block. Chloe didn't open her mouth again and regretted doing so in the first place. Michael looked back at Chloe, who was sitting quietly in the back seat, looking at him. Michael raised his eyebrow as if saying, "Sorry." Chris looked in the rearview mirror at Chloe, regretting his outburst.
"Chloe, I'm sorry."
"It's okay," she replied. Just then, loud growling noises echoed from her now empty stomach. Michael laughed and looked at Chris.
"You hungry?"
"I know I am," Chris asked.
"I'm hungry. How about you, Chloe? You hungry?"
Michael asked. She looked at both of them, eyebrows raised, and asked, "How could you want to eat after seeing that?" She nodded her head back in the direction of the crime scene. Chris answered, looking at Michael.
"Because we're hungry? How's Chinese sound?"
"Linguas?" Michael asked. "Oh, I love linguas," Chloe butted in.
"I thought you weren't hungry," said Michael.
"No, I asked, how could you want to eat after seeing that? I didn't say I wasn't hungry. Can't you hear the whale mating call going on inside my stomach at the moment?" she asked. Chris smiled and looked back at her.
"Yeah, I think Mrs. Lopez even heard that."
Chloe smirked and looked out of the window as Chris and Michael began to laugh. "Fine, let's go," Chloe said, still a little embarrassed. Lingua's was an old Chinese restaurant that had been in the same location downtown on the corner of Navarro Street and Broadway since the 1930s. It was a landmark spot in the tourist trap of old downtown San Antonio. The building itself was nearly 100 years old, but renovated every 10 years or so to keep the look fresh while still keeping the old look that attracted so many visitors. On the front doors were large, gold-plated dragons. In the lobby was a man-made pond filled with colorful koi fish. You had to cross a small wooden bridge in order to reach the doors to the actual restaurant ahead. Inside, the crown molding was antique gold dragons. The walls were adorned with ancient Chinese scrolls and paintings, and the smells of various meats and veggies cooking with exotic sauces filled the entire building. Each room had a red Chinese-style archway, and Chinese opera music echoed throughout the two-story building. Large golden coins with red and gold tassels hung from long-poled ceiling fans. Along the second-floor balcony were 2 seat tables for couples. Groups of 3 or more sat downstairs in the extra rooms. Autographed celebrity photos were displayed on the walls, surrounded in white Christmas lights. With parties of 6 or more, you get a free egg roll with the meal. Everybody was engaged in their own private conversations. Many were loud, so Chris, Michael, and Chloe were okay with discussing the details of the case while stuffing their faces with the bold, colorful flavors of Lingua's amazing cuisine. The energy throughout Lingua's was electric. You felt re-energized, refocused, and refreshed once you were inside. Call it good feng shui or what have you, but there was no denying the amazing energy. The trio may have been in dark places in the voids of their own minds, but once they began to soak in the atmosphere and eat, their spirits were magically rejuvenated. They dined at a round table on dishes of mugu gai pan, sesame chicken, and lemon chicken with fried rice, lo mein, and egg rolls. Everyone took a little from each dish, sampling all the flavors of this award-winning restaurant. Chris worked on wrapping a bite of lo mein around his chopsticks, saying, "The way I figure it is that the killer must be somebody who is physically weak and lacks self-confidence. I mean, so far he's chosen victims who are 1, elderly, and 2, weaker than him. He chooses Vicks weaker than him, people who can't fight back, like, say, a 30-year-old. He must be either small, short, skinny, a wimpy guy, somebody who was likely bullied a lot themselves, somebody weak. And according to CSI, he uses a small knife for cutting and a spoon to scoop out the eyes." "I don't think he sees himself as weak anymore," Michael said as he took a bite out of a crunchy, oily egg roll. Damn, this is good," he said while chewing on the egg roll. Chloe and Chris just looked at him. Chloe sipped her tea and continued on to her lemon chicken. "And he's likely pretty young. Most scary poster writers are in their teens and 20s. Very few are older than 30. He's probably some uber fan nerd who has the social skills of Bigfoot. I think he might be one of those people who write pastas that are constantly rejected once he posts them up on the site. You'd be surprised at how many disgruntled writers there are out there. Michael took a break from Mugu Gai Pan and said, "So, maybe he has a blog. But how do we narrow it down? I mean, aren't there thousands of users on there?" Chloe was nearly done with her plate. "Yes, but I know most of the admins who run the site. Many of them do edits most of the time and are in charge of quality control and look for red flags like things not safe for work or incriminating. I'll contact one of my buddies tonight and ask them if they've noticed any blogs that are really weird or seem out of the ordinary, like someone ranting about something odd. Maybe he can help," she suggested. By now, everyone was just about finished with their tasty late dinner. The waitress placed the check and fortune cookies on the table in front of Chris. Chris gave each of them a cookie, and they all began to unwrap them, eager to crack open and read what advice they'd been given. Chloe laughed as she read hers first. Michael raised an eyebrow to his. Chris cracked his open, revealing the small slip of white paper that read, "Always a valley before a hill." He ate the first half of the cookie and placed the fortune inside his pocket. With a smile on her face, Chloe attempted to keep the fun energy going just a few more minutes before the night ended. She spoke up. "Hey, have you guys ever heard where you can add the phrase 'in bed' after reading your fortune out loud?" Chris replied, "Yeah, haven't heard that one in a while." "Okay, I'll start," Michael said. "Every exit is an entrance to new experiences. In bed." Everybody busted out laughing. Chloe read her fortune out loud. "Your talents will be recognized and suitably rewarded. In bed." Everybody laughed once again. "What about you, Chris? What did you get?" Chloe asked. Chris reached into his pocket for the little paper slip. He pulled it from his jeans pocket and held it up, reading out loud. "Always a valley before a hill." "In bed," Michael and Chloe said in unison. Chris smiled and added, "Mine wasn't as funny as yours." He reached for his leather wallet, pulling out a credit card and placing it on the check tray, and tucked his fortune inside one of the slots containing several other saved fortunes. The plan was set. Chloe would reach out to her admin friend and wait for an answer. Michael would go home and take a plate of sweet and sour pork with steamed rice and wontons to Carol, and Chris would go back home to his Jim Beam and lonely apartment where maybe he would get some sleep. They would reconvene at Chloe's apartment at 8 a.m. Since Chris paid for this meal, Michael would bring tacos for breakfast. Chloe left a $10 tip for the waitress. She thought it was only fair. As they opened the last set of golden doors, they stepped into the freezing late-night air. With full stomachs, they all felt rejuvenated and happy after such a fine meal. Even Chris. He almost hated to have to part ways for the night. It was good feeling something like his old self, even if it was for less than an hour. Maybe there was still some little ray of hope for him. He didn't have many friends anymore. Not that no one liked him. It was his choice to suffer in silence. The three of them made their way side by side to the parking lot, which was now full to capacity. As he went to unlock his door, Chris noticed some sort of ticket under the driver's side wiper blade. Michael peeked over to see what Chris was looking at. What's wrong?" Chloe asked as she waited for Chris to unlock the doors. Chris pulled up the wiper blade and picked up the ticket. It was a dine-in receipt for Linguoise. "There's something written on the back," Michael pointed out. Chris turned the ticket over and read out loud. "Keep your friends close. Keep your enemies closer. In bed. 2 down. 8 more to go." "Shit, he was there, listening to our conversation inside," he shouted, hitting the roof of his car. "He followed us from the goddamn crime scene. That ass was watching us the whole time," Michael said with a shocked expression. "Oh my God," Chloe added as she felt a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. Chris knew the game was on. The killer was letting them know that he can roam amongst them virtually undetected whenever he wanted. It also meant he had an advantage over them. The element of surprise. You have that, you have the greatest advantage. Chris, being the dead man he saw himself as, was less concerned for his own safety and more concerned for his partner and Chloe. Michael had a family to worry about, and Chloe lived alone. That's right. Michael. "Call Carol right now to make sure they're okay," Chris ordered as he finally unlocked the doors and they all quickly entered the Camaro. Michael dialed Carol's cell number as Chris started up Miss Sunshine. The loud screeching sound of the Camaro tires peeling out echoed through the streets of downtown. Michael finally connected with Carol. The kids were asleep and she had just dozed off watching TV in the living room. She was still a bit groggy, but okay. "Keep her on the phone, Mikey," Chris said with a hurried tone as he sped through downtown with his red police flasher on top of his car and sirens blaring. He drove well beyond the speed limit, trying to reach Michael's house as fast as he possibly could. Michael continued to speak to Carol. "Honey, listen, I need you to do something for me. Go upstairs and check on the kids and make sure they're okay. I'll tell you when we get here. Me and Chris are on our way there now. I know you're scared, just will you go and let me know how they are? Thank you, honey. I'm gonna stay on the phone with you the whole time." Everyone nearly held their breath awaiting an answer from Carol. Although they were going fast, time seemed to slow down in that moment. "They're good? Oh, thank God," Michael said as he and everyone else exhaled with relief. "We're just around the corner, honey. Stay with them. I'll stay on the line. Don't hang up till we get there, okay?" The Camaro slowed down in front of Michael's house, a typical house for a downtown city block. Michael was already getting out even before Chris came to a complete stop. He ran up to the door and unlocked it. He placed his keys into his coat pocket, drew his service pistol, and entered the house. Chris exited the car, saying to Chloe, "Stay in the car. Lock the doors." Chloe nodded, saying, "Okay." Chris ran up the steps, drawing his Colt .45. "I'm right behind you, Mikey. I'm coming in," he called out to Michael. "Roger," Michael called out as he ran up the stairs to his bedroom, where Carol and his children waited. "Let them be okay," Chris thought to himself over and over as he cleared each room on the bottom floor. "All clear downstairs. How are you, Carol? Everybody good up there?" Chris called out, looking upstairs from the bottom of the staircase. Silence. "Mikey? Carol? I said, are you okay?" he shouted louder. Nothing. Just then he made his way upstairs, pistol drawn, facing the floor. Michael made his way out of the bedroom, saying, "We're okay, Chris. We're okay, man." "Damn it," he said under his breath momentarily, closing his eyes in relief. Carol came to the doorway of Eva's bedroom, holding Mickey. Chris holstered his .45. Carol asked them, "Okay, now what's going on? Chris, will you tell me since he's being a drama queen?" After what seemed like a good half hour had passed, Chloe felt the urge to use the bathroom. She pulled out Chris's card and dialed his cell. She told him of her little dilemma. Michael gave her the okay to come on inside and use their bathroom. Chris walked outside to escort her. "Is that her?" Carol asked Michael as she and Chris walked in together. He led her into the downstairs half bathroom. "Yeah, her name is Chloe Marks. He saved her from a satanic ritual sacrifice when she was a kid," Michael explained. "Damn, that's crazy," Carol said, wide-eyed. "Don't you think she looks a little bit like Abby?" She leaned in and whispered to Michael. You get me closer to God. The time was now 7:50 a.m. Chris was waiting in his car parked alongside the curb in front of Chloe's apartment building. As he sipped his hot coffee, he observed the morning rush of civilians starting their day, walking down the sidewalk on their way to work or wherever they were going. He knew that any one of them could be the killer. About this time, Michael pulled up in his 2012 Charger. He still had 2 more years left to pay on it. It wasn't as cool as Miss Sunshine, but he liked it just the same. Michael parked across the street from Chris. He got out with a white paper bag full of tacos from Benjamin's, a popular spot for tacos downtown. He walked across the street to Chris, exiting his car. "What's up, Josephine?" he asked Chris in his usual playful manner. "Blood pressure," Chris answered. "Yeah, that was funny the first 100 times you said it," Michael shot back. "You been up yet?" he asked. "No. How's everybody?" Chris asked before handing Michael a cup of coffee he picked up from a gas station before arriving. "They're all good. Hey, thanks for having my back last night, man," answered Michael. Chris nodded, peering into the bag, and asked, "So, what'd you get?" 3 bacon and bean, 3 sausage and egg, 3 chorizo and egg and hot sauce," Michael called out. It was a cold morning, so he was eager to get inside. "After last night, I'll bet you gave the wife your own brand of chorizo," Chris said, returning Michael's playful comment from earlier. "Shh, you know it, brother." Michael went along with the flow. They both had a good laugh, then made their way upstairs to Chloe's apartment. Chris sipped his coffee once more and walked up the staircase ahead of Michael. He held open the door and said, "Lead the way, Watson." The floor creaked, alerting the tenants that there were visitors coming up. As they made their way upstairs, Chris thought about how Michael might actually make it to chief someday. He knew they wanted to pair him with an experienced investigator so that he could earn his stripes, so to speak. Of course, this would be long after Chris was retired, or in a grave. Michael knocked, not using the standard police knock that Chris used yesterday. As Chloe opened the door, a gust of warm air, rock music, and freshly brewed coffee hit Michael and Chris, further awakening their senses. Chloe had on a black Motley Crue Shout at the Devil pentagram t-shirt and hip hugger jeans, which was ironic since she was almost sacrificed to Satan. She wore a chain bracelet and tiger's eye chandelier beads on her left wrists, and her fingernails were painted red. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail. Her favorite album of all time was playing in the background, Motley Crue's Too Fast for Love. She greeted them with a quick, "Good morning, guys. Come on in." Immediately upon walking in, Chris pointed to the stereo and exclaimed, "Best album ever made." "Heck yeah, a man who knows his music, I see. Good wake-up music," Chloe said. Michael wasn't as familiar with 80s hair bands as they were, but he had to admit the sounds of the at-the-time young, coked up, fresh and full of energy glam metal band were invigorating. Chloe walked back over to her laptop on the dining room table, where she had been most of the night, with the exception of 2 hours of much-needed sleep. "Okay, guys, I think we hit pay dirt," she said with excitement, looking at her computer. "Really?" Chris asked as he played air guitar to track number 1, Live Wire. Michael looked at him with his eyebrows raised, shaking his head. Still, it was amusing to see his hard-edged partner behave like this. "Yeah, okay, here's what I got." Chloe pointed to the stereo remote, turning down the volume. "Last night, I contacted my buddy. He said that he did notice a very strange blog, posted a few hours ago, in fact. He sent me the link. It's a letter for us. I wanted to call you both earlier when it came in, but I figured after everything, it was best if I just waited till you got here. Besides, I just got this message about 2 hours ago. It was posted by a user who goes by Necro1990. Here, it says, 'Hello, detectives. Obviously, you are good at what you do since you are reading this. This means that you may actually get close to catching me one day. But you won't. When I first saw you last night walking out of her house, I knew it was going to be fun. Then, when I overheard you discussing your theories on me at that delicious Chinese place, well, that was very amusing as well. Did you like the fortune I left you? That saying, it's true, you know. One should keep their enemies closer. I intend on doing this. I'll be seeing you very soon. You won't recognize me. Expect to hear about number 3 very soon. She is just waiting to be discovered. It will be quite the surprise to you. Oh, don't worry, it's not the young detective's wife. She's safe for now. Killing her, as fun as it might be, is not my intention. It was exciting watching the panic on his face as he ran inside his house last night, fearing the worst. The older detective, the one in charge, lives in such a dark, lonely place. It's a wonder you can find the strength to wake up every morning and do what you do. You must be fighting some demons of your own. As for the lady detective, a lovely creature indeed. It was nice meeting you. I look forward to our game of cat and mouse." "Son of a bitch!" Michael shouted as he turned away, holding his hands on his waist. Chris nodded his head. "This asshole thinks it's a game. Well, was the guy at the table able to retrieve an email or IP address, a name, anything?" "Well, that's the weird thing. It traces an IP address back to Canada to a guy named Jean-Pierre de Lafitte. But he could have rerouted the IP address to throw us off. I mean, what is the probability that he took a vacation to San Antonio just to kill 10 people, then go back home to Canada, eh?" Chloe said, looking up at Chris. Michael called Carol on her cell. He didn't want to alarm her, so he calmed himself down before dialing and walked into the kitchen. He played it like he was just going to say, "Hello, I love you and have a good day, honey." Chris stared at the black screen with its white letters and pondered for a moment the killer's whereabouts. Was the killer able to reroute his IP to Canada? He was growing more frustrated. By now, the CD had finished playing and it was silent in Chloe's apartment, except for Michael's low conversation. After a moment, Chloe got up from her seat and walked over to her sofa and sat down, unlocking her cell phone and checking emails and social media. She just needed a moment to herself. About this time, Michael came from the kitchen with a look of relief. Chris looked at him and said, "They're okay, buddy. Look, if you won't, go ahead and request for a patrol unit to stand guard while you're not at home. I'll call it in for her too. Nice work, kiddo." He addressed both Michael and Chloe. Chloe walked back over to the dining table, peeking in the paper bag, smiled and said, "Nice, tacos from Benjamin's." 20 minutes later, they were finishing up their breakfast tacos and coffee when Chris received a call from Chief Mills. Chris: "Good morning, sir." Mills: "Morning, Chris. Rodriguez with you?" Chris: "Yes, sir, he is." Mills: "Put me on speaker. I need you both to hear this." Chris: "Okay, sir, you're on speaker. Rodriguez is here, sir. So is our consultant, Chloe Marks." Mills: "Good morning, Rodriguez. Good morning, Mrs. Marks. Mike, your family doing okay after last night?" Michael: "Good morning, sir. Yes, they're fine." Chloe: "Good morning, sir." Mills: "Okay, let's cut to the chase. 10 minutes ago, we got an anonymous tip stating that there's been a murder at 5719 East Houston Street. Chris, we realize that's your apartment building." Chris: "Oh no, who is it, sir?" Mills: "Chris, it's your neighbor, Delia Bonner. Her death has to be connected to your case. She had a web link carved into her left forearm and her eyes removed and placed into her mouth, like the other Vicks." Chris: "We're on our way, sir. And one more thing, sir. I'd like a uniform on watch for Miss Marks' building and for Mike's house if you can spare them, please." Mills: "You got it. And hey, Chris." Chris: "Yes, sir." Mills: "Stay safe out there." Chris: "We will, sir. Thank you." Chris's heart sank into his stomach upon learning of Delia's death. He placed his cell into his jeans back pocket and walked over to the bathroom saying, "I'm gonna make a head call if that's all right." "Yeah, of course," Chloe said, knowing he just needed a moment to let it soak in and to collect his thoughts. Chris shut the door hard behind him. Michael walked over to the sofa and sat down with a similar sinking feeling. It was a growing, nagging fear inside that ate him from the stomach up. He could feel it swimming around in there, tugging at his soul. It felt like something was going to happen to Carol and his children. He wanted to be there at home to protect them, but he also needed to stop this man from hurting anyone else. When you're in a fight, you don't worry about the punches and kicks flying at you. You don't take out the hand or foot. You take out the brain. That's the real threat. He needed to take this guy down. He had faced real danger before, but never so close to home, where what he holds so dear and precious was in danger. He had seen true horror before. Wives, mothers, and their children murdered, raped, and now he was determined to stop this thing posing as a human being. Chloe sat next to Michael, leaned in and asked him, "Hey, so what's the story on Chris and his wife? I could sense he wasn't telling me something painful. What happened?" "That's not my place to say. I'm not so sure he would want me to tell you. All I can say is she's dead. His son, too," Michael said quietly. Chloe's eyebrows raised in towards the center of her face as she said, "Oh my God, that's so sad. That's terrible." "Yeah, it is, but I never said anything. Got it?" Michael said, looking intently at Chloe. "Of course," Chloe said as she arose from the sofa and walked over to her black parka hanging by the door. She removed it from the coat rack on the wall, pulling it on one arm at a time. Inside the bathroom, Chris splashed his face with extra cold water flowing from the freezing pipes. He looked in the mirror and thought about the last conversation he and Delia had. She was just a lonely old woman in search of a little company. She never hurt anyone. He prepared himself mentally for what he was about to see at the crime scene. Images of Delia lying on the floor, eye sockets empty, mouth full of blood and white, oozing eyeball innards. He told himself, "You can do this, Chris. Walk it off." Outside, Michael and Chloe were checking their social media accounts on their phones and waiting for Chris to come out. The sound of the toilet flushing echoed from the bathroom, as did the sound of water from the sink as he washed his hands. That was their cue to put away their phones and stand up, ready to go. Chris opened the door and walked over to where they stood. "You ready?" he asked. "Yeah, I already texted Carol and let her know about the uniform on their way, for my peace of mind," Michael said. "Chloe, go ahead and bring your laptop. We may need your help with some things. This piece of shit knows where I live. Probably knows where we all live by now," Chris said. She then nodded and walked over to the dining room table. She wrapped up the laptop cord, closed the computer, and put them away in a black case with a handle. "Okay, ready," she said, walking towards the door. With that, they all made their way outside into the freezing morning air. Chloe rode with Chris, and Michael crossed the street to his Charger. They were off to Chris's building. The ride in Chris's car was mostly silent. Chloe wanted to talk, to ask him questions. However, it was obvious Chris didn't want to talk at the moment, so she just looked out of the passenger side window at the chaos of the city streets. Downtown San Antonio was a beautiful city in the winter. Chris was focused ahead on the road and on what they were about to discover. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "I met Vince Neil once when me and the wife were in Vegas on the weekend. He was walking in the lobby of the Palazzo with an entourage of fake-breasted blondes and brunettes. Motley Crue had just finished a tour and he was there for R&R. My wife noticed him right away and pointed him out. I didn't want to bother him, but we caught his attention anyway. My Abby was a looker, so he smiled at us. Abby just grabbed my hand and there we were, introducing ourselves to Vince Neil from Motley Crue. We talked for about 5 minutes, then his limo arrived outside to pick him up. It was really cool." "That's so rad," Chloe smiled and said, wide-eyed. Chris smiled and said, "You know, I don't think he realizes the impact they make on the world. I think he just did it all to have fun. For the remainder of his life, he will be greeted by Uber fans everywhere he goes, until the day he dies. They all will." Chloe looked away at the city streets. Snow melted now. The mood had lightened a bit in the car. In Michael's car, he listened to Godsmack's Whatever. Although he tapped his thumbs to the beat of the drum on the steering wheel, his mind kept going back to Carol and the kids. At least there was a unit on the way. He hadn't been to Chris's place too often, maybe 2 or 3 times in the past 2 years or so. It was dark, sad, and depressing. The air was thick with despair. Not just in his apartment, in the whole building. It was as if it carried this emotion of misery and attracted people who were marinating in their own sorrow. He wondered if it had called out to Chris after he sold his old house. He probably had too many painful memories living there. Probably couldn't sleep. In all likelihood, knowing Chris, he decided to start anew by selling the house and moving downtown in the thick of it all, in the middle of the chaos that was this beautiful city. Cool Hand Chloe. Once again, there was a crowd gathered outside the dreary apartment building. Upon entering, Chris, Michael, and Chloe were greeted by a uniformed officer watching the front door in the hallway. Residents were actually standing out in the hallways, likely the first time there had ever been so many out all at once. Sure, in a place like this, there was the occasional suicide. That was to be expected. Some residents liked to speculate on who the next one would be. Many thought it would be the sad detective with the dead wife and son. They didn't expect that old lady upstairs across from him to ever be murdered. This was indeed a shock to the low-down community. Chris led the way as Michael and Chloe followed up the stairs. "Charming," Chloe whispered to Michael, who acted like he didn't hear the rude comment. Chris heard her, but said nothing. On the way up, they saw looks of concern on the faces of residents, most of whom were pale white. It was obvious that they didn't get much sun. Most of these people were recluses. This was considered a social gathering. As they arrived at Delia's apartment, they were met with another uniformed officer. They all looked at each other and nodded. They readied themselves for another ugly scene. They had to duck under the yellow crime scene tape to enter. The flashing lights of photos being snapped brightened up the room every few seconds. CSI was walking around taking samples, dusting for prints. The medical examiner, a different guy this time, was waiting for the detectives to arrive so he could officially pronounce Mrs. Bonner as dead, and he could finally leave. Mrs. Bonner's apartment looked like the typical elderly grandmother apartment. There were old paintings and photos on the walls. Knick-knacks sat on the tables. Antique wall hangings such as tin owls, copper flowers, mirrors were strategically placed to fill large wall spaces. Cheap rugs were on the floor in every room. Mrs. Bonner's old white cat, Gabriel, was hiding under the bed. When Chris walked through the living room, he saw that the bathroom was the location of Delia's body. As he kept walking, time seemed to slow down. He didn't want to have to see her there lying on the floor. Bloody, lifeless, eye sockets empty. It's one thing to see dead bodies as part of your job. You tend to get used to it. However, when it's someone you know, there's this sinking feeling you get in the pit of your stomach, like rocks weighing you down. They weren't particularly close. However, she was a cool old lady. She didn't deserve a fate like this. Chris took his last step up to the bathroom door where CSI personnel looked at him and walked out of the bathroom to allow them to work. There on the floor was Delia, in the same state as the others. Eye sockets empty and bloody. Eyeballs placed into her mouth. Only this time, there were claw marks around her eye socket going down her face and neck. The left sleeve of her robe was rolled up to the elbow, exposing the expected web link carved by a small knife. A message was written on the mirror in blood. Last night was fun. Thanks for the memories. Chris looked at her with remorse and regret and said, "I'm sorry, old girl. Sleep with angels." Michael walked in, following Chris. Chloe stayed just outside of the bathroom. Upon seeing the victim's lifeless, mutilated body and message written on the mirror, she once again felt sick at her stomach. She knew she couldn't look like a squirrely amateur, so she managed to keep her 2 breakfast tacos and coffee down. Just breathe, she thought to herself. She noticed the scratches on Delia's face. She put 2 and 2 together. "Bloody Mary," she blurted out. Chris and Michael both looked at her knowingly. Even they had heard of Bloody Mary. Chris pulled a cell out of his back pocket and snapped a photo of the web address on Delia's forearm. As he held it up to Chloe, she typed the link into her phone and pressed enter. After 5 seconds, it popped up. "Yep, Bloody Mary," she said, holding her cell up so Chris and Michael could see it. They leaned in, confirming. Chris looked at Michael, saying, "That's 3 murders in 3 days, and we're no closer to catching this guy. He's just screwing with us, dangling his ass right in front of the line with no teeth. Something's gotta give." Just then, a CSI investigator shouted, "Hey, I got the cat. He was hiding under the bed." Upon hearing this, the trio looked up momentarily, but then looked away, knowing that a cat cannot speak or testify in court. "What a shame. You know the cat saw it. Too bad we don't have the technology to read their minds," Chloe said. Michael looked at her and said, "You know how many homicides we come across where there's a cat or a dog or a damn parrot? A lot." The CSI investigator then called out, "Hey, the cat has blood under its claws." Chris and Michael looked at each other with smirks on their faces. Chloe and Michael quickly walked out of the bathroom, Chloe first. Chris followed after them. "Take a sample and ID it. We might actually have this guy," Michael said with some fire back in his voice. Chris showed a bit of that spark again. His gait straightened, his spirits raised. He took control of the scene. "Collect as much of it as you can and take it back to the lab. Mikey, call the coroner and have them come pick up Mrs. Bonner. I'm paying for the burial. No next of kin." "Aw, that's sweet of you," Chloe said in a girly sing-song tone. "Yeah, that's gonna take some time, Detective. We got cases backed up ahead of you. Maybe we can have something for you by tomorrow morning. I'll see what I can do." "No promises," said the investigator, holding the cat. Chris held his hands on his waist in frustration, but knew that's how standard protocol went. He walked up to the investigator, leaned in and said, "All right, but keep in mind that this guy is a serial killer and has killed 3 innocent people in the last 3 days. He needs to be off the streets. So the department and old people everywhere will thank you if you can get some results ASAP." The investigator, who was visibly shaken, said to Chris, "Okay, we'll get it done. We'll call you in the morning with the results." Chris nodded his head and said in a sarcastic tone, "Thank you, sir." Once the blood samples and all evidence was collected, and resident statements were collected, the coroner arrived to the scene 2 hours later to take Mrs. Bonner to the city morgue. Now that CSI was leaving back to the lab, the trio could leave once the crime scene was secured. Half an hour later, they were able to leave. 4 hours had passed since arriving. Now all they could do was wait for the blood results. "Hey, you live here, right?" Chloe asked Chris. "Yeah, so?" he answered. "So, can we see your place?" she asked him. Chris looked up at Michael as if to ask him if he put her up to it. "Hey, don't look at me, dude," he said, slightly raising up his hands at his sides. Chris looked back at Chloe and said, "Chloe, listen, this is where the road ends for you." "What? No. Why?" she demanded to know. "Chloe, we've dragged you pretty far down the rabbit hole in this case. You've had to see things nobody should have to see. Besides, you've seen enough ugly in your life. Thank you so much for your help. I'm gonna go ahead and take you home now," Chris told her. No, you can't just expect me to go home, never hear from you guys again, and never know if the killer is still out there." She raised her voice. "You can say no all you want, Ms. Winehouse. It's done. Besides, when the lab results come back, we got him," Chris said. "Yeah, but what if the blood isn't the killer's? What if it belongs to Mrs. Bonner? Did you ever consider that? Then you'd be no closer to catching him." "Michael, say something. Don't let me go out like that," she pleaded. Michael just looked at her with a look of guilt. "He's the boss. Sorry, dear." Chloe looked back at Chris and shouted, "This is bullshit," and stormed off outside into the cold afternoon air. She was so angry she decided to walk home from there, computer in hand. Inside, Michael and Chris were debating over keeping her around. "Look, Michael, I don't want to see her get hurt. Why can't you understand that?" Chris asked Michael, standing in the lobby of the apartment building. "I know you don't. Look, man, we were the ones who came to her for help. We drug up all those old memories that she probably spent years trying to move past, and here we were, asking her for help. On top of that, the cop that saved her was now asking her to return the favor. All she's asking for is to stay on till we catch the guy. Why can't you see that?" Michael argued. "We'll protect her. Give her this. Besides, I really want to read this pasta when it's done," he said with a smile. Chris smiled and nodded. "Yeah, it would make a pretty cool story. I wonder who would play me in the movie, though." "My money's on Adam Sandler," Michael said. They both busted out laughing. "Or maybe Ron Perlman, Old Man River." After a good laugh, just when they needed to break through the air of dread, Chris said, "Let's go tell her." They opened the door and expected to find Chloe standing somewhere nearby, pouting. They spotted her walking way down the block, carrying her laptop case. She walked like she was pretty pissed off. The detectives both laughed at the sight. They began to run down the street laughing and shouting out loud. "Chloe, hey! Chloe! You can stay! Chloe!" Chloe heard them from so far away. She stopped and turned around with an angry look on her face. She crossed her arms, still holding the laptop, not moving from her spot. She expected them to go to her. Their run slowed into a jog, then a fast walk, until they caught up to where she stood. Panting, Chris said, "You can stay on, till we catch him." "Yeah, I don't want to have to chase you down again," Michael said, trying to pull in enough air to catch a full breath. "You know, you guys are really out of shape," Chloe said, arms still folded, clutching her computer. "Okay, but I have a few conditions. 1, I get to ride along with you, Chris, until the case is closed. 2, I get to write about this case. Of course, I'll change the names around. It will be loosely based off the real case. 3, the department buys my meals until the case is over." Chris looked at her, finally catching his breath. "Anything else?" "No, that's it," she said, playing her hand. Chris and Michael looked at each other. Chris looked back at her and said, "Okay, deal." He extended his hand out to Chloe. She took it and smiled, trying to keep cool. Then she took Michael's hand as he said, "Well played, Cool Hand Luke. Come on, let's go get lunch," Chris said as he turned around and began walking back to his car.